On a summer day in June 2020, Chasey Scarvilli, who was a 13-year-old, and her older sister, Scout, who was 14, were enjoying their summer vacation. The two sisters had a very close bond, and they did everything with each other, so they decided to set up a hammock outside their home. If you don't know what a hammock is, it's like a piece of strong fabric or netting suspended between 2 points, like trees or posts, used for swinging, resting, or sleeping. It's often hung off the ground and supported by ropes or straps at each end. The girls first thought of setting it up in their front yard, but there was nothing to hang the hammock from, since, like I said, it needs 2 anchor points, so they decided to do it in their backyard. To give a little context, here is the backyard layout. As you stepped outside through the back door or onto a patio, you'd first notice a stone or brick paved area, with garden chairs or a small table for family meals or summer evenings. The landscaping was likely intentional, neatly trimmed bushes, colorful flowers lining the edges. To your left or right, you'd see 2 decorative brick columns, part of a low-standing structure that framed part of the yard, perhaps bordering a flower bed, a raised garden, or a short wall near the patio. And near the most outward pillar, there was a tree close enough to it to make the girls think setting up the hammock between them would be a smart idea. And from the looks of it, it was. The brick pillar looked stable enough, at least to them, so they stretched the hammock to fit between the tree and this brick pillar. After doing that, Scout was the first to get on, and so she did without any trouble. The hammock held, so then she told Chasey to get on, and so she did. And that's where everything went wrong. Remember that brick pillar? It was a decorative piece, meaning it was built for appearance, not function. It wasn't designed to hold weight, anchor objects, or withstand force. Its purpose was purely aesthetic, to make the yard look nice. Unlike structural pillars, which are reinforced with steel rods and filled with concrete or solid material to support buildings, fences, or heavy loads, this decorative pillar was likely hollow and filled with just stacked bricks or mortar. So even though it looked strong, it had no real strength beyond its own shape. So tying a hammock to it introduced a kind of pressure it was never meant to handle, and with that the pillar collapsed. And to make it clear, these were real bricks, so hundreds of pounds of bricks fell on Scout and Chasey, burying them in the bricks. It's not reported how actually tall the pillar was or how many bricks made up the pillar, but it was clearly a substantial amount if it buried them. The girls weren't being supervised by anyone, which, to be fair, it isn't anyone's fault. I mean, they were in the backyard, so nobody thought anything would happen to them. But as the pillar collapsed, it made a loud noise. This would make the father run over to the patio door, and then he saw the brick pillar collapsed, and then he saw the girls under it. The father then ran to them, moving the bricks aside and screaming to the rest of the family to call emergency services while he did CPR, which wouldn't actually do anything because the bricks made their heads bleed and fractured their skulls. Spinal injuries may have occurred from the downward force, possibly snapping their necks or spine instantly. The chest and abdomen would have been crushed, leading to internal bleeding, broken ribs, and ruptured organs like the liver, lungs, or spleen. The weight of the bricks against the hammock also meant their backs would have been pressed against the fabric with nowhere to move or absorb the shock, effectively pinning them and compressing them. So CPR wouldn't have really done anything, but that's the only thing he could do. Emergency services arrived, actually incredibly fast. They transported them to the nearest hospital, but they were pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The official cause of death for both girls would have likely been listed as a blunt force trauma to the head and torso, resulting in fatal internal and external injuries. After an investigation by the police, their deaths were ruled accidental, but they were also violent, sudden, and deeply traumatic, not only physical but emotionally, for everyone who witnessed or responded to the scene. Algonquin Provincial Park is one of Canada's most iconic and historic wilderness areas. It's located in Ontario and about 3 hours north of Toronto, and it's absolutely incredibly large. It spans over to 7,600 square kilometers and home to tons of dense forests, interconnected lakes, rivers, and rocky edges. It's really stunning. This park was also home to a vast network of canoe routes. Actually, there's over 2,000 kilometers of them. Portage trails connect waterways, allowing adventurers to carry their gear and canoes from lake to lake, often trekking across uneven ground or thick brush. This would lead to the Toronto District School Board's REACH program to send students out on a field trip to go and experience it. This program aimed to support youth from underserved communities through outdoor learning experiences. So in the summer of 2017, a group of high school students from Toronto prepared for an outdoor education trip deep into the wilderness of the park. For many, it was their first time leaving the city, their first brush with raw nature, far from traffic, concrete, and cell towers. And among this group was 15-year-old Jeremiah Perry, a student at C.W. Jeffries Collegiate Institute. A good kid described to be polite and kind-hearted. He was very excited to go, so on July 3rd, 2017, the group set out. The trip was to last 5 days, consisting of canoeing across multiple lakes, setting up campsites, hiking, and learning survival skills. The group was to be supervised by staff, including outdoor education teacher Nicholas Mills, and said to be under the guidance of trained adults. Now, before even going, apparently all safety protocols were in place. Permission forms were signed, waivers were completed, and students were to be screened for their ability to swim, since a large part of the journey would have been in the water canoeing, and supposedly all passed. But by the end of July 3rd, after a day of canoeing, the group started to set up their tents, cooking over fires, and stargazing beneath the summer sky. By July 4th, the group made it deeper into the park. That evening, they camped near Big Trout Lake, a vast open body of water ringed with remote wilderness and no nearby roads or cell service. The next day, July 5th, during a routine stop, students were allowed to enter the water to swim and bathe after paddling. At some point during this afternoon, Jeremiah would enter the water. Details about exactly how it happened remained unclear. What is known is that he slipped under the water and never resurfaced. See, when the students were screened for their ability to swim, Jeremiah actually failed the test. See, all students on water-based excursions had to pass a swimming test in advance, but he failed. He couldn't swim. Actually, in fact, nearly half of the students failed as well. So practically half the students didn't know how to swim, even though a large portion of this field trip would be in the water canoeing. This went directly against TDSB policy, and for whatever reason, they were still allowed to go. Unfortunately for Jeremiah, there were no students and staff nearby, but in the remote setting, emergency response was nearly impossible. Obviously, there was no lifeguard and no rapid way to call for help. Once they realized he was missing and he hadn't returned to shore, the adults began searching the area, calling out, scanning the water, and organizing students. There was immediate efforts to find him, but they were informal and uncoordinated. Since they couldn't call for help having no self-service from that point, some of the staff had to travel, likely by canoe and portage, back to an access point or campsite with communication equipment. This could have taken several hours, depending on their location. When the staff got to the campsite, they alerted Ontario Park staff, who then contacted the Ontario Provincial Police. This triggered the dispatch of the dive team, who were flown in by float planes the following day to conduct the search and recovery. But his body wouldn't be recovered until the next day. When the dive team found him, he clearly had drowned, but they found something else. His fingernails were damaged, meaning he made desperate attempts to claw his way to the surface or grab onto something, anything to survive, but there was no use. The news devastated the group and the greater school community. A boy full of promise and innocence was gone. His father, Winston Davidson, later said that the call from the school board about his son's disappearance came after Jeremiah had already died, and the family had not even known the full nature of the trip he had been sent on. So they didn't even know that he would be canoeing, because clearly they knew he didn't know how to swim, and if they were consulted of this, they would have told them that. What followed was a mixture of grief, anger, and questions, many of which pointed back to why a non-swimmer had been allowed on a multi-day canoe trip across open water. An internal investigation revealed a disturbing truth. Jeremiah had failed the mandatory swim test, and despite that, he had been permitted to attend anyway. Even worse, 14 of the 32 students on the trip had also failed or never completed the test. There had been a serious breach of safety protocol. The teacher in charge, Nicholas Mills, who had been responsible for organizing the trip and ensuring safety compliance, was suspended with pay shortly after. The case was turned over to the police. After a lengthy investigation, Mills was charged in 2019 with criminal negligence causing death. What makes this even crazier is that they weren't even given life jackets, and there was no emergency communication plan in place should something go wrong. In 2023, Mills was rightfully found guilty of criminal negligence causing death, but Mills was only sentenced to 1 year in jail, and followed by probation and a ban from working with children under 16. It was a mid-spring night in Shifnal, Shropshire, the kind of night that felt made for laughter, music, and a few too many drinks. William Hubbard was 19 years old, and he had been out with a group of friends just enjoying the usual scenes of small-town nightlife. He had recently finished college and was thinking about the future, about where he would be working, travel, or maybe getting out of the quiet town he had always known. That night, William was with Oliver Barber, a 20-year-old and a local from the same area. The two weren't strangers, they were actually mutual friends, and the closeness of the neighborhood made it easy to build connections. Barber had driven himself into the town earlier in the evening in his BMW 116, planning on drinks in good company. Despite drinking throughout the night, he chose not to leave his car parked. Instead, he offered friends a ride. I want you to keep that noted. By 2:45 a.m. on May 27th, 2023, Barber was behind the wheel again. William took a seat in the rear passenger side of the vehicle, and two others were in the car as well. As they pulled away from the town, heading along the A464, the BMW tore through the 30 miles per hour zone at over 60 miles per hour. The road was narrow, winding, and quiet at that hour. No traffic, no police, just the sound of the engine pushing harder than it should. Barber was intoxicated, though his judgment, like his vision and his coordination, was too blurred to realize it. At some point, he missed a turn. This wasn't a gentle miscalculation. No, he veered off the road at a high speed, and this would send the vehicle crashing through a steel bollard that tore into the undercarriage. The BMW then launched into a hedgerow, then it skid sideways through grass and brush before slamming at full speed into a solid wooden fence bordering private land. The crash itself was violent. The wood of the fence shattered into splintering stakes, and one large horizontal beam broke loose and was hurled directly into the side of the vehicle, smashing through the window where William sat. The timber post speared through the rear cabin, striking William in the chest and lower abdomen with such force that it pierced through flesh and muscle, fracturing ribs, rupturing organs, and continuing into the seat back behind him. He was impaled by the beam, which drove through his body like a battering ram. The impact was so severe that his body was crushed backward into the car frame, pinned between the splintering wood and the collapsed steel. There was no time to scream, no chance to brace or shield himself. The trauma was instant and catastrophic. The wood punched through his torso, likely shattering vertebrae, destroying arteries, and causing massive internal hemorrhaging. Blood would have filled the cabin, soaking the seat, his clothes, and side panel. He died within seconds, his injuries utterly beyond what any emergency responder could treat. When police and paramedics arrived at the scene, they found the BMW crumbled against the fence line. Barber was conscious, bleeding heavily from his face, but alive. The front seat passengers had minor injuries, but when they reached the rear of the car, they found William's body pale, motionless, and still pinned in place by the jagged beam that had penetrated the car and him. It was clear he had not survived. Investigators arrived shortly after, and the scene was grim. Splintered wood lodged into the frame of the BMW. Blood smeared across the windows and seats. Police noted that no braking had occurred before the crash, confirming that Barber had been speeding uncontrollably at the time of impact. Barber was later arrested at the hospital, where blood tests revealed his blood alcohol level to be 134 milligrams per 100 milliliters, nearly 70% over the legal limit. He was charged with causing death by dangerous driving. At trial, the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses described the BMW as flying down the road, and experts confirmed that William would have had no chance of survival from such an impalement injury. The judge remarked that Barber's selfish decision to drive drunk and fast had destroyed a life in the most brutal way imaginable. In December 2023, Barber pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 4 years and 8 months in prison and banned from driving for more than 7 years. But no sentence could repair what had been done. On the evening of April 18th, 2024, 6 teenagers from Archie Williams High School in California came together for what was meant to be a simple and carefree outing. They were close friends from neighboring towns like Fairfax. The girls had planned a joyride through the scenic back roads of Marion County, laughter filling the cabin of a Volkswagen Tiguan as they made their way westward along Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. The group was a mix of students, ranging from wide-eyed freshmen to juniors already talking about their futures. Each of them carried a spark known in their school hallways for the creativity, humor, and closeness. That evening, the excitement was electric. With the sun setting behind the redwoods and hills, they took the road with a sense of freedom and joy only teenagers understand. The vehicle they rode in was a compact SUV, roomy enough for the group to squeeze inside, even if only 5 seats were built for passengers. It's unclear who owned the SUV, but one of the girls had taken the wheel. She was 18, a young driver likely filled with nerves and excitement. It was one of those decisions that felt light in the moment, just a drive, just a night out with friends. But see, Sir Francis Drake Boulevard is a winding stretch of highway that snakes through a valley, a place where towering trees lean over narrow roads and the asphalt curves around bends with little warning. In daylight, it's a stunning ride, but at night it becomes something else. Dark, tight, and flanked by thick woods and steep shoulders. That night, the girls moved quickly, their laughter and music lost into the wind. As the SUV pushed deeper into the valley, they were moving fast. Witnesses would later recall the blur of headlights cutting through the night and the hum of tires pressing harder than they should against the road, its momentum carrying into a stretch of highway known for its sharp curves and unforgiving turns. As they approached one such bend, the SUV strayed off the pavement. The tires skidded across the loose gravel shoulder. Then, without warning, the vehicle jerked sharply off the road and crashed into a massive tree that stood just feet from the asphalt. The force of the impact crumpled the front of the SUV, crushing the engine block inward. Windows burst into fragments, spraying the interior like glass confetti. Metal folded inwards with violent speed. Within seconds, the situation worsened. The crash had caused catastrophic damage to the vehicle's systems. A spark was all it took to trigger a chain of violent, rapid changes inside the engine compartment. The front of the car was suddenly illuminated in orange and yellow. The flames surged quickly, sweeping up the hood and curling along the sides. The air inside the SUV shifted, filled with thick smoke and rising heat. Synthetic materials like plastic and foam began to catch. The entire cabin became a furnace. Some of the girls were still slumped against seat backs or crumpled awkwardly in their seats. Others stirred, frantic, disoriented, trying to make sense of the chaos around them. One girl managed to force her way out to the driver's side, dazed and injured. Another, barely able to move, was pulled from the back seat by a passerby who had seen the fire bloom through the trees and rushed to help. Every second counted. The flames were growing louder, the smoke blacker, and the heat was more intense. Emergency calls flooded dispatch centers. Sirens echoed through the valley, but the response time was strained by distance and darkness. By the time fire crews arrived, the vehicle had been overtaken, its interior reduced to shadows beyond a curtain of fire. Flames roared above the wreck, tires hissing as they melted. The roof began to collapse inward. It took 15 minutes to suppress the fire with water and foam, and even then, the wreck was unrecognizable. A skeletal flame, scorched, and smoke that clung to the air long after the blaze was gone. But see, during the rescue attempts, a few of the girls inside were still alive, trying to get out but couldn't. They tried their best to break the window, but couldn't. 4 out of the 6 young girls that were in the car burnt alive, screaming in agony while the firefighters desperately tried to save them, but couldn't. After finally the flames were extinguished, firefighters and paramedics moved in. The inside of the SUV told a story too difficult to forget, one of chaos, confusion, and unbearable heat. The metal interior was warped, pieces of the vehicle fused together by flame. Scattered among the debris were personal items, necklaces, charred mobile phones, a half-melted sneaker, and 4 bodies that were melted beyond recognition. For responders, it was one of the most haunting scenes they have ever worked with. The investigation would later point to inexperience, speed, and road conditions as the likely contributors. Toxicology tests found no alcohol or drugs in the driver's system, but it didn't matter, the damage had already been done. As of this point in time, May 18th, 2025, no one has been charged.
And now, folks, it's time to say goodnight. We sincerely appreciate your patronage and hope we've succeeded in bringing you an enjoyable evening of entertainment. Please drive home carefully and come back again soon. Good night.